The courtroom was packed. The scent of old wood and freshly printed legal documents filled the air as people murmured among themselves. It was supposed to be a routine hearing, but no one could ignore the tension in the room. At the center of it all sat Judge Margaret Holloway, known for her no-nonsense approach to law. But those who had faced her knew there was something darker beneath her strict demeanor, an undeniable prejudice that many whispered about but never challenged. Across from her stood Michael Carter, a well-dressed black man in his early 40s. He carried himself with an air of quiet confidence, his tailored suit fitting him perfectly. Despite his composed expression, his piercing gaze showed he wasn't a man to be easily intimidated. He was here for a simple legal dispute, one that should have been a matter of procedure, not humiliation. Judge Holloway, however, saw things differently. She barely glanced at the legal papers before making up her mind. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice laced with cold authority, "people like you come into my courtroom thinking they can manipulate the system. I won't have it." A murmur spread across the room. Carter's lawyer, Sarah Mitchell, stiffened in her seat. "Your Honor, with all due respect." "Silence," Holloway snapped, slamming her gavel. "I don't need a lecture on respect from someone defending him." The racist undertone in her words was impossible to ignore. Gasps echoed from the spectators. But Michael Carter didn't react, not yet. He simply leaned back, watching the judge as if he knew something no one else did. The next 7 minutes would change everything. A heavy silence hung over the courtroom after Judge Holloway's blatant display of prejudice. The spectators shifted in their seats, some exchanging uneasy glances. Even the bailiff, who had worked with Holloway for years, seemed uncomfortable. Michael Carter, however, remained composed. He had dealt with people like her before, people who believed power gave them the right to belittle others. But what Judge Holloway didn't know was that Carter had come prepared. Sarah Mitchell, his lawyer, took a deep breath, trying to contain her frustration. "Your Honor," she began carefully, "Mr. Carter has the legal right to present his case without personal bias interfering with the proceedings." Judge Holloway scoffed. "Bias? That's a bold accusation, Miss Mitchell, but I don't expect anything less from someone defending a man like this." Carter finally spoke. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that demanded attention. "A man like what, Your Honor?" The room went still. Holloway narrowed her eyes, realizing she had spoken too freely. "Like someone who thinks they can bend the law to their will." Carter chuckled softly. "Interesting, because I was under the impression that the law applies equally to everyone. Perhaps I was mistaken." The tension escalated. Judge Holloway's face flushed with anger. She had controlled her courtroom for years, ruling with an iron fist, but something about Carter unsettled her. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't cowering like she expected. She adjusted her robe, trying to regain control. "Enough of this nonsense. I've heard all I need to hear. I'm issuing my ruling now." But just as she lifted her gavel, Carter pulled out his phone and pressed a button. "I think you'll want to hear this first." The courtroom collectively leaned forward. Something was about to happen. Something that no one, especially Judge Holloway, saw coming. Judge Holloway froze mid-motion, her gavel hovering above the bench. The arrogance in her eyes wavered for the first time as she watched Michael Carter calmly place his phone on the defense table. A voice echoed through the courtroom. "Judge Holloway, we've received multiple complaints regarding your conduct in court. We need to talk about your history of biased rulings and judicial misconduct. You are being investigated." The recording played loud and clear for everyone to hear. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as the realization settled in. Michael Carter wasn't just an ordinary defendant. He had come prepared, and now Judge Holloway was the one on trial. Her face turned a shade of deep red. "Where did you get this?" she barked, her voice shaking with anger. Carter leaned forward, his expression calm but razor-sharp. "I received this from a very reliable source, Your Honor. You see, I've been gathering evidence on your unethical behavior for months. Every case you dismissed unfairly, every defendant you insulted, every time you overstepped your authority, it's all documented." Judge Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. She gripped the edges of her bench, her power slipping through her fingers like sand. The prosecutor, a young woman who had once been afraid to challenge Holloway's rulings, suddenly found her voice. "Your Honor, This is serious. If these allegations are true, you are in direct violation of judicial ethics. Holloway's breathing grew uneven. This is absurd. He's just trying to manipulate the court. Carter cut her off. The truth is hard to hear, isn't it? He tapped his phone. This is just the beginning. There are more recordings, more evidence, and if you doubt their credibility, I suggest you look behind you. Judge Holloway turned her head slowly. 2 uniformed officers had stepped into the courtroom, standing quietly by the exit. Her world was crumbling, and for the first time she realized she wasn't the one in control anymore. Judge Holloway's breath hitched as she spotted the 2 uniformed officers at the back of the courtroom. Their presence wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice laced with panic. "You dare bring officers into my courtroom without my approval?" Michael Carter smirked. "Your courtroom? I think you misunderstand, Your Honor. A courtroom belongs to justice, not to any one person." Murmurs spread among the spectators. Court clerks, lawyers, and even the bailiff exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever seen Judge Holloway shaken like this. One of the officers stepped forward, his badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Judge Holloway, we're here on official business. We have reason to believe that serious ethical violations have taken place under your jurisdiction." Holloway slammed her gavel down in a desperate attempt to regain control. "This is an outrage. I am a sitting judge. You have no authority over me." Michael leaned back, his confidence unwavering. "That's where you're wrong. This isn't about authority. It's about accountability. You've bullied defendants, manipulated trials, and handed out unfair sentences for years. But now the system you've abused is finally catching up with you." The prosecutor stood, clearing her throat. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate suspension of this trial until these allegations against you are addressed. We cannot proceed under a compromised judge." Judge Holloway's face twisted with fury. "You think you can strip me of my power?" She turned to the bailiff. "Remove these people from my court, now." But the bailiff didn't move. Instead, he looked toward the officers, waiting for their cue. The power had shifted, and Holloway realized she was no longer in command. The lead officer pulled out a folder. "Judge Holloway, we have a formal complaint from the Judicial Oversight Committee. You are under investigation." Her grip tightened on her gavel, but her hands trembled. The courtroom, once her domain, now felt like a cage closing in around her. The walls were crumbling, and for the first time in her career, she had no way out. Judge Holloway's face twisted with a mix of anger and desperation. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, and for the first time she felt the weight of her own authority slipping through her fingers. "You dare accuse me of misconduct," she spat, her voice cracking. "This is absurd. I am a respected judge." Michael Carter folded his arms, his expression calm but firm. "Respected by whom, Your Honor? Certainly not by the people you've mistreated for years." The lead officer stepped forward, his tone professional but firm. "Judge Holloway, we have substantial evidence of judicial misconduct, including cases of racial bias, tampering with verdicts, and unethical collusion with certain prosecutors." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged nervous glances, and even the bailiff shifted uneasily. Holloway slammed her gavel down, trying to command the room. "This is a witch hunt, an attack on my character." Michael shook his head. "No, this is justice. Something you've denied people like me for too long." The prosecutor, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Judge Holloway, under these circumstances, I request that you recuse yourself from all active cases until this matter is investigated." The judge's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally, but even her usual supporters were silent. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of an impending scandal. One of the officers pulled out a document and read from it. "As of this moment, you are being placed under investigation by the Judicial Oversight Committee. You are ordered to step down from your duties until further notice." Holloway clenched her fists, her knuckles white. "You think you can do this to me? I have powerful connections. This will ruin my career." Michael took a step closer. "No, Judge, you ruined your own career. Now you'll finally have to answer for it." The weight of the moment settled over the courtroom. For the first time, Holloway was no longer in control, and she knew it. Judge Holloway's hands trembled as she gripped the edges of her bench. The once commanding figure of the courtroom now looked small, vulnerable, and desperate. "I will not step down," she declared, though her voice lacked its usual authority. "This is a disgrace, a setup." Michael Carter raised an eyebrow. "A setup? Judge Holloway, every case you've mishandled, every biased ruling, and every unethical decision you've made is coming to light. This isn't a setup, it's accountability." The lead officer approached her bench. "Your Honor, I suggest you cooperate. We have a warrant to access your court records, and we already have testimony from multiple lawyers who have witnessed your misconduct firsthand." Gasps and murmurs filled the courtroom. Several lawyers who had once feared Holloway's wrath now exchanged knowing glances. Some nodded in agreement. A lawyer in the audience, a black woman who had faced Holloway's unfair rulings before, stood up. "Judge Holloway has humiliated and ruined the lives of countless people in this courtroom. It's about time she faced the consequences." Holloway's face flushed red with rage. "I will not be spoken to this way in my own courtroom." Michael took another step forward. "It's not your courtroom anymore, Judge. This place belongs to justice, and today justice is finally being served." For the first time, fear flickered in her eyes. Her gaze darted toward the exit, but officers already stood blocking every path. There was no escape. The prosecutor spoke again, his voice unwavering. "Your Honor, I'm officially requesting that you vacate the bench immediately." Holloway clenched her jaw. "You can't do this." Michael smirked. "Oh, we can, and we are." The courtroom fell silent as everyone waited for her next move. The walls were closing in, and for the first time in her life, Judge Holloway had no control over the outcome. Judge Holloway sat frozen in her seat, her fingers gripping the gavel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her world was crumbling, and she could feel it slipping through her hands. "This is an abuse of power," she shouted. "You can't remove me like this." Michael Carter chuckled, shaking his head. "An abuse of power? That's ironic, coming from you. You've silenced voices, rigged cases, and denied people justice for years. But now the law is finally holding you accountable." The officers stepped forward. "Judge Holloway, if you refuse to step down willingly, we'll have no choice but to escort you out." She shot up from her chair, eyes wild. "You wouldn't dare." "We would, and we will," one of the officers replied firmly. Holloway's gaze darted to the gallery. The very people she had once treated with disdain were now watching her downfall unfold, some with quiet satisfaction, others with sheer disbelief. The same lawyers who had cowered before her now held their heads high. The black attorney who had spoken earlier crossed her arms. "Judge Holloway, you built your reputation on fear, but now that fear has no power. You abused the law to serve yourself, and today the law is serving you justice." Michael stepped closer, voice calm but firm. "Step down or be removed." A bead of sweat rolled down Holloway's temple. She could see the officers closing in, their expressions unwavering. She had ruled from that bench for years, but now she was just another defendant standing trial, except there would be no biased judge to save her this time. Trembling, she took one last desperate glance around the room. But no one was coming to her rescue. With a shaky breath, she finally whispered, "Fine." And with that, the once powerful Judge Holloway stepped down, her reign of injustice coming to an end. The tension in the courtroom was thick as Judge Holloway reluctantly stepped down from her bench. Her face, once smug with arrogance, was now pale with humiliation. The officers flanked her on either side, ready to escort her out. Michael Carter took a deep breath. "Judge Holloway, under federal investigation, you are officially placed under arrest for judicial misconduct, discrimination, and obstruction of justice." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Holloway's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. "You can't do this! I'm a judge!" One of the officers, a tall, stoic woman, stepped forward and pulled out a pair of handcuffs. Not anymore. The sound of the metal clicking around Holloway's wrists echoed through the silent courtroom. The once mighty judge was now just another criminal in the eyes of the law. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, but Holloway was far from silent. "This is a disgrace. You're all making a mistake," she shrieked, struggling against the cuffs. "I made this court what it is. I held it together. And now you're turning on me?" The audience watched in shock and awe. Some of the people she had wronged looked on with quiet satisfaction. Others, including the young black man she had insulted, simply observed, knowing karma had finally caught up with her. Michael met Holloway's glare with calm authority. Justice isn't about power, Holloway. It's about fairness, and you've forgotten that for far too long. As the officers led her away, her furious protests echoed through the hall. Reporters outside the courtroom scrambled for footage. Cameras flashed. The fall of Judge Holloway was officially public. For the first time in years, justice had been served, not by her, but to her. As Judge Holloway was escorted out of the courtroom, the once tense atmosphere shifted dramatically. Murmurs turned into full conversations, and soon, applause erupted from those who had suffered under her rulings. Some even stood, clapping and nodding in approval. Michael Carter remained composed, but inside he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had not only defended himself against Holloway's racism, but he had also ensured that she faced the consequences of her actions. The young black man Holloway had insulted earlier, David Mitchell, approached Michael. "I don't even know what to say," he admitted. "I thought the system would always protect people like her." Michael nodded. That's what she believed too. But the law isn't about who you are, it's about what you do. Today, she learned that lesson the hard way. David shook his head in amazement. "I appreciate what you did, not just for me, but for everyone she's mistreated over the years." Just then, a journalist stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Agent Carter, can you comment on the arrest? Did you anticipate this outcome?" Michael hesitated before speaking. "No one is above the law. Today's events prove that. This isn't just about one bad judge, it's about accountability." The journalist pressed further. "Do you believe this will change how the judicial system operates?" Michael gave a firm nod. "It has to. People deserve to trust the courts, and that starts with making sure corruption and bias have no place in them." The media frenzy continued as reporters scrambled to get statements from court officials and former victims of Holloway's rulings. Meanwhile, in the background, the courtroom doors swung shut behind Holloway as she was led to a holding cell, a criminal now awaiting her own trial. Justice had finally prevailed. Within minutes of Judge Holloway's arrest, the news had spread beyond the courthouse. Social media exploded with videos from inside the courtroom, capturing the exact moment when she was taken into custody. Hashtags like "Justice Served" and "Corrupt Judge Arrested" trended nationwide. News stations quickly picked up the story, airing footage of Holloway being led away in handcuffs. Legal analysts dissected the case, discussing the significance of her arrest and how it exposed the deep-rooted biases in the justice system. Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Michael Carter walked out to a swarm of reporters. They bombarded him with questions, cameras flashing in his face. "Agent Carter, did you know about Judge Holloway's history before today? Do you believe other judges should be investigated for similar misconduct?" Michael held up a hand, silencing the crowd. Today was about accountability. This wasn't just about one bad judge, it's about ensuring fairness in the system. If we allow corruption to go unchecked, then justice is meaningless. His words only fueled the media storm. News anchors praised his composure, and civil rights activists called for a deeper investigation into judges with similar histories. Inside the courthouse, officials scrambled to determine what would happen next. Old cases ruled by Holloway were now under scrutiny, with attorneys already filing motions to overturn her past decisions. As Michael left the courthouse, he received a phone call. It was from the Attorney General's office. "We need to talk," the voice on the other end said. "There's more to this than just Holloway." Michael's expression hardened. He had exposed one corrupt judge. But was this just the beginning? As Michael Carter drove away from the courthouse, his mind raced. The call from the Attorney General's office had been brief, but the message was clear. Judge Holloway was just the tip of the iceberg. Arriving at a secure government building, Michael entered a conference room where Attorney General Rebecca Lawson and several senior officials were waiting. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Holloway's arrest is a game changer," Lawson said, placing a thick folder on the table. "We've been investigating judicial corruption for months, but we never had a breakthrough until today." Michael opened the folder, his eyes scanning over documents. There were dozens of complaints against judges in multiple districts, all with a common pattern: unfair rulings against minorities, questionable financial dealings, and abuse of power. This goes deeper than we thought, Michael muttered. Lawson nodded. Holloway was reckless. She let her arrogance get the best of her. But others in the system, they've been smarter, covering their tracks. We need to act fast before they start erasing evidence. Michael took a deep breath. Arresting one corrupt judge had been a challenge, but now they were talking about dismantling an entire network of corruption within the justice system. What do you need from me? He asked. Lawson slid a USB drive across the table. Start here. We need hard proof. And Michael, be careful. If Holloway thought she was untouchable, imagine what these other judges believe. Michael clenched his jaw. This wasn't over. It was just getting started. The morning after Judge Holloway's arrest, the entire country was talking. News channels ran the footage on repeat, her shock, humiliation, and eventual arrest. But for Michael Carter, this was just the beginning. Inside the FBI's headquarters, Michael sat with Attorney General Rebecca Lawson and a team of federal investigators. The information from the USB drive had revealed an underground network of corrupt judges, lawyers, and politicians. We have enough to take down at least 10 more judges, an agent reported. Bribery, illegal sentencing, abuse of power, it's all there. Lawson leaned forward. Michael, your courage exposed this corruption, but are you ready for what comes next? These people will fight back. Michael nodded. I've fought for justice my whole life. I won't stop now. Meanwhile, in a high-security prison, Judge Holloway sat in a holding cell. Her expensive suit was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Her arrogance had vanished. She wasn't above the law anymore. A guard walked up, smirking. You have a visitor. Holloway looked up. Michael Carter stood on the other side of the glass. You did this to me, she spat. No, Michael said calmly. You did this to yourself. She glared at him, but for the first time, there was something else in her eyes. Fear. Michael stood up. Enjoy your time here, Judge. You're finally where you belong. As he walked away, he knew this was just the beginning. Real justice was finally being served. What do you think about this shocking turn of events? Do you believe justice was truly served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more eye-opening content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update.